Hey everyone. So this is Tuesday right now, and Wednesday we're going to have the quiz retake. And while the questions won't be exactly the same as the one you took on Monday, they'll be similar. And despite being able to use your notes and all those outlines I tried to make and things, the quiz did not go well at all. Before we give a little review assignment on Wednesday, I wanted to go over the answers with you so we don't have to do that in class. And if you still have questions on this, ask. So the first question asked, what's not true about the election of 1796? And you can see there wasn't really a consensus about this class, um, about this question. Um, So Adams did win because he had three more electoral college votes. He won 68 to 71. That was on the homework video plus on the outline. Um, Adams did run as a Federalist. Remember, we went all through all those maps, and Adams was from Massachusetts, and New England was very much Federalist. And we did mention that he ran as a Federalist. But both candidates did not campaign hard. I remember trying to point that out in the Venn diagram I shared with you guys. Um, Adams campaigned very hard. Jefferson really didn't campaign at all. People campaigned on his behalf. Perhaps that's why he lost by 3 electoral votes. Okay, the XYZ affair, that is all in relationship to France. So the majority of you had that correct, so that's good. Most of you had this correct as well. The Alien and Sedition Acts could expel people who were seen to be dangerous to the peace and safety of the U.S. We also did a bit of a case study on the Alien Sedition Acts. I remember I spoke a lot about him in this video because for homework because it was pretty fascinating. And most of you had that correct, that he was sentenced to prison for writing disparaging words against President Adams. That was on one of our outlines as well, not just the homework video. This one, there was no really consensus to as well. This was in a homework video and on an outline. And this one is pretty important because you want to know that there was opposition to the Alien and Sedition Acts, right? That was really a Federalist proposal. Jefferson opposed it. So did Madison, and they drew up the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. I also mentioned in another video this was so important because it suggested that a state might be able to secede, right? Because they opposed the Alien and Sedition Act so much they were threatening secession. So you hear this again by James Calhoun, you hear this again at the Hartford Convention, and of course by the Civil War. So it's important to know that the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions opposed the Alien Sedition Acts. Now, most of you put judicial review, which has me concerned because I think we really tried to drive home judicial review. And all judicial review, it did say you can oppose legislation, but the Supreme Court, right? Jefferson and Madison were not members of the Supreme Court at any point in their lives. And it said that they can make judicial review said the Supreme Court can say legislation's unconstitutional. It doesn't say they're just going to oppose something. So maybe I see why you could have guessed there, but this is two completely different branches of government, and all sorts of things. Okay, most of you had this correct. Hamilton did not run in the election of 1800. That's good. Okay, majority had this as well. New England states mostly favored Adams. Remember, Adams was a New England man from Massachusetts. That really shaped his personality, his Puritan background, maybe why he seemed a little bit aristocratic and things like that. And if you had 7 correct, you should have 8 correct. I remember telling Alex it was not the same question, but it was similar. So New England states mostly favored Federalists. Okay, the Whigs really aren't a thing yet in the United States. The idea of being a Whig, which we didn't get into yet, existed, but not as a political party. Luckily, no one put communists. Remember, the Republicans were mostly the South and the West. I think our past 4 or 5 videos mentioned that so far. New England was Federalist, South and West was Republican. Um, the majority had this correct, which is good as well. The election of 1800 is sometimes called the Revolution of 1800 because it was the first time the control of the federal government passed from one political party to another peacefully and legally. I know I drove this point home many times, so I'm glad most of you got that. We have a majority here as well, but Jefferson saw westward expansion as a way to combat the disadvantages from industrialization. For the, quite a few of you put agriculture. Jefferson was a big agriculture guy, a big agrarian. He believed that this country would be a farming nation, and that's why he would keep pushing west and opening the land up to cultivation and things like that. He saw industrialization, urbanization, is much more dangerous than an agrarian lifestyle. Of course, not everyone agreed with him, but that's part of that Jeffersonian vision we discussed. Okay, so the majority of you had this, but really, surprisingly, not as much as I would have liked. The Louisiana Purchase was from France. Remember, we talked about Napoleon, a war with Britain, and he couldn't really deal with this anymore. And Monroe went to France and tried to get a little bit of land, but instead they said, hey, you can get all this instead. So, we should know that. That was with France. Okay? And as I said at the end of class, the Louisiana Purchase map was even right there on the board. The Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the U.S. pretty much, but it didn't go all the way to the Pacific, right? The Adams-Onis Treaty, I purposely said that right before the quiz, hoping you guys were paying attention. The Adams-Onis Treaty was the one that opened it up to the Pacific Northwest. And after that, that's when things like Lewis and Clark's expedition and Pike's expedition and all that could actually make it all the way to the ocean. Florida obviously is not on the Pacific, so I was sort of hoping that you would not choose that. Okay, now as some of these questions, I just wanted to make sure that you were detailing your maps. And I know when I went over the maps, if you didn't label something, I tried to sort of mark that. All right, so we know St. Louis is on the Mississippi. We know New Orleans is on the Mississippi. If you didn't, pick up on the other places, hopefully you know Memphis is in Tennessee, and hopefully you know Richmond is in Virginia, right? And hopefully you know how Virginia, if it's on the Atlantic, can't be on the Mississippi, right? So just try to do like process of elimination. If you don't exactly have Memphis labeled or Richmond labeled, try to just think things through, right? So Richmond was the correct answer. You definitely should have not thought it was New Orleans or St. Louis because you definitely should have had those at least labeled on the map. And if you should have also labeled the Lewis and Clark expeditions, and you should have known that they left St. Louis. And even one of those videos, I showed the Gateway Arch and how that was considered like the gateway to the West, because that's where Lewis and Clark left and all that stuff. But at least the majority of you got that right. Okay. So also you were supposed to label that mountain range on the one map. So you would have noticed that Pikes Peak was located on the Rocky Mountains. Luckily, no one put the Catskills because they're in New York, or no one put the Alps because they're in Europe. But even the Appalachian, remember I said the Appalachian was like our first border when we were the 13 colonies? Okay, but then we were starting to move west. So you had to think, what was our next western border? And it would have been sort of like the Rocky Mountains. It was also one of our on this day things we went over about Pike and the Rocky Mountains. So this, was brought up, several times. And most of you had the Atlantic Ocean, so that's good. You should have labeled that on your map, and it also just sort of makes sense, right? For Dearborn, that was also something you should have labeled on your map as well. Okay, so just a little bit above half of you had that. Fort McHenry, you should have had that on your map as well. Okay, not most of you got that. The right answer was the Chesapeake Bay. So 34%. All right, not like Huron. We have to go over the Star Spangled Banner story if you guys don't know this one. Most of you got this right. This was a big victory.